Welcome back to the second instalment featuring George Millington. In the last episode, you heard about George's rise in the business world, from his early stockbroking days to transforming a humble coffee business into a successful, sought-after coffee brand, Monjava, which was swiftly bought by San Remo, to then moving into logistics. In this episode, you're going to hear all about the rise and rise of his rural livestock empire. George's dream was always to run a farm. He loved the land since he was a boy.
I had a feeling this is what I wanted to do, and I wanted to bring my family up in the country, and Sophie did too. So we came out there, and I'd have to say almost from like the first month, just absolutely loved it.
He is now the bloke behind Collinsville Stud Merinos, one of the country's most well-respected and prominent sheep studs in Australia. To find out how all that came to be, enjoy the rest of George's story. To recap, George has just decided to step away from the day-to-day running of his logistics business, still partly owns it, to venture north into pastoral country.
Again, fortunate in the way things happened, what thing was going on. Had only really ever had livestock knowledge about farming, so was really more interested in livestock farming than cropping.
So cattle more so than
cattle
sheep?
and sheep. Again, life's twists and turns, because I married a girl from the mid north. I was quite keen to go down the southeast, more reliable rainfall, probably better livestock. So I've said I'm not going down there, it's too sandy, which a lot of it is until you get really far down.
I thought she'd say it was too cold.
No, it's colder up here, surprisingly enough,
really?
because it's higher.
Oh, well, that's true.
Yeah. And I've since learned all that. I didn't even know north, south, east or west or our plants group then. I had a lot to learn, an enormous amount to learn. Came up here, looked around, and again, timing, found a livestock property at Hallett, which was at one stage Australia's longest closed-end sheep stud, which was APD, run by the Murray family. They were some of the first people to breed merinos in Australia, one of the foundation flocks of Australia. That stud business had been wound up about 3 years before they put it on the market by their eldest son, Angus. Angus and Tiffany, again, lovely people, great to deal with. Angus had made the decision that they wanted to go and move to town, and after 7 generations of farming didn't want to do it anymore. I said, okay, well, here's an opportunity. Here's a place that's made money in the past. So I said, bugger it, let's go and buy it. We bought it. As we were buying it, Sophie was pregnant with our second child, Alice.
So this is
2010. So Alice was born in March 2011, and that is basically when we settled on Kapiti. We spent 2 months driving up and back from Adelaide because we needed to renovate the house slightly so we could live in it, and then we all went and lived up there.
What was the state of the property?
Pretty run down. The house was a beautiful old historic house which was built in 1870, which is one of the other things that attracted it to me. But to be honest, it was pretty run down, but it was all set up for livestock. Even though I sort of had this dream to go and do all this, the only experience I'd had sheep farming, I sort of had a little bit of idea at how it worked and what all the rest of it. Sophie's father, who lived at Hornsdale, which is just north of Jamestown, was very helpful to me in the next 2 years. So I went and bought some sheep. I have to say, if you're looking at the people to help you on the journey, Joe Scammell from Spence Dixon Co., he was my first stock agent. He was very helpful to me as well, gave me a lot of advice, extremely helpful on helping me through the journey.
So just to be clear, you had no stock,
very limited
no stock on the place when you arrived there. There was nothing.
So we had to go and buy sheep. We actually bought sheep out of the pastoral country, which Joe actually sourced for me. So again, very steep learning curve. Gone from not really ever having to run it all myself, but I knew this is what I wanted to do, or I had a feeling this is what I wanted to do, and I wanted to bring my family up in the country, and Sophie did too. So we came out there, and I'd have to say almost from like the first month, just absolutely loved it. Thought, right, I've worked in 2 other different industries, but this is the industry I want to work in.
So what was it that you loved about it?
I just like being outside.
Okay.
And again, if you go back to when when I was in share broking, we're a primary industry. It all starts with us. We actually are responsible for producing food and fibre and selling it. And when you have a look at it, right, if we're going to do stuff, Australia has a competitive advantage in really doing 2 things that it's really good at and synonymous for all around the world. One is mining and one is farming. I didn't want to go dig stuff out of the ground. So farming, right, if I'm going to get back to basics and live in the country and do this sort of thing, farming's going to want what I'm going to want to do. This was really interesting. Made an enormous amount of mistakes. I'm sure all the neighbours looked at me going, what the hell are they doing? Didn't really know that much about running self-replacing merinos, but figured that merinos were probably the way to go. I was attracted to merinos from the start because dual sources of income. You're selling them for meat and you're selling them for wool. At that stage, sheep weren't nearly as high as what they were, what they have been up to 18 months ago. So again, very fortunate to buy sheep country and get into sheep when they weren't worth as much as right up until quite recently what they have been worth. So again, very lucky. And again, also, since I've started farming, and my whole business career, because if you like to think, in 1992 when I left school, interest rates were 19%. And up until, sort of right at the end of the recession, or sort of 88, and then basically from my whole business career prior to the last 18 months, I've been operating in a falling interest rate environment, which is good for asset value, good for taking risk. And, Australia and the whole world's had this sort of super cycle. So I've been, again, very lucky that when I wanted to start the whole journey has been sort of, and I look back on it now, I was just very fortunate. This is when I started, and this is the backdrop to the business environment and the expanding global economy that I've sort of been operating in.
Let's fast forward through that period.
So sheep.
Yeah, sheep. Yep.
My father-in-law, extremely helpful to me.
Yep.
Went through all sorts of learning experiences about shearing and all the rest of it. Taught me to crutch sheep and all that sort of stuff. Running a self-replacing flock, ran a small amount of cattle, lambing, lamb marking, all the stuff that goes with it. And then I started to think, well, I actually really like living up here. This is what I do. But I have run a branded business before, being in the coffee industry, and I have learnt that having a brand enables you to be able to price your product differentiate it, and try and demand a little bit more than what the average producer is, so you're not a price taker. And I lived on an historical stud property that has been breeding merino sheep and selling rams all over Australia for one of the longest than anywhere else in Australia. And I thought, this is all a bit of a stroke of luck. Right, the country obviously works for having stud merinos on it, and I did a little bit of research where merinos originally come from in Spain. The reason all the studs are in the mid-north, basically from Mount Bryan all the way up to Hallett, is because the environment and the topography is very similar to where merinos come from in Spain. That's why they thrive so much. I thought, right, well, I'm in the right place, and I know a little bit about running sheep, and I've got the right property, and I want to go back to running a branded business. Right, if I'm going to run a branded business and continue to farm, what am I going to do? Hell, I better get into the sheep stud business. So that's how I made the decision to go and do that.
You make it sound so easy.
Yeah. And then I thought, well, going back to the coffee days, I spent as a really small producer with a not very well-known brand name. It was really hard to compete with the really well-known brand names, and having a really well-known brand name is such a competitive advantage in trying to demand more for your product, and theoretically should be a better product. How do I get the opportunity to get in that? So I looked at a couple of smaller studs, and again, I was going to end up being another Monjava coffee, just a very small fish. At that time, one of the Bungaree studs, James Hawker, was dispersing his stud. I looked at them and I thought, I'm not really sure. And then Hanbury's at Collinsville, obviously the most well-known stud in South Australia, but you could say Australia and you could say most influential with Banook and a couple of others. Paddy actually had Collinsville Station on the market for sale. So I thought,
When was the last time Collinsville was up for sale?
Well, it has traded a couple of times. So Garnett bought it in the late 70s and then had to sell it in the 92 recession that we were just talking about, and then Hanbury's bought it from receivership. So they'd basically owned it since 1992. So getting to the point of how I actually dealt with them. So, right, Shells were selling it. So I rang them up and I said, would they be interested in actually selling their stud as well? I'd be interested in buying the station and buying the land that comes with it. So this wasn't the land at Bourbon, not the land at Mount Bryan. The land out east of Burra, Collinsville Station, so where it all first started, 138,000 acres. I said, I'd be interested in buying the station, but only if you'd be interested in selling your stud and your sheep and your brand. And I thought they'll just come back and say, no way. And again, all a timing thing and all got to be very lucky. So then I got the answer back within about 3 days. They've just had this big family meeting. Jack, who's the son, lovely fella, has decided he's not really interested in running he's more interested in cropping, doesn't want the stud. If you would be interested in talking to us, we'd be interested in talking to you. I said, okay, no worries. So then I ended up doing the deal through Shells, but I then sort of started dealing directly with Peter Whittlesey, who was the general manager of the business for them at that stage. And then I actually started dealing direct with Paddy Hanbury. And so we basically went down to a meeting in town, got in Shells, myself, Paddy and Peter Whittlesey all sat in a meeting and sort of said, well, this is what we're interested in doing. I sort of said, well, I'd be prepared to pay what I think is a fair market value for the sheep, which, again, very fortunate for where we were at the sheep at the time. It was a fantastic brand and really well known, but they probably, and I think they would admit this, they weren't, and Pete would admit this too, the stud wasn't their focus. They were interested in cropping and running a mixed farming operation. They had Arcoona and other properties and stuff down the southeast, and they were running a farming operation of which Collinsville was part of it.
Oh, see, I thought it was all about the genetics and all about...
It is. And the other thing that really drew me to the business is the fella who's now my general manager of my farming business. Tim Dalla was actually running it, and I went around and did a bit of research on Tim, and he was widely regarded as the best young breeder of merinos in Australia. And everyone wanted him to try and get him to work for him. He had been at Collinsville for about sort of 6 years. Pete had recruited him to actually run it. Tim probably wasn't being given the opportunity or the capital investment to be able to do what the sheep could do and what the brand could do, because there was obviously lots of other things competing within the business for money and capital expense, which is fine. That's the way they wanted to run their business. So I went down, had a meeting with Paddy and Pete, and we did the whole thing over a 2-hour meeting and a handshake. So basically, he was quite happy to sell the station at fair market value. He was quite happy to give me the sheep at fair market value for stud sheep. And then effectively with that came the brand, all the historical stuff, all the IP and all the ability to be able to do that, as long as I basically gave him a guarantee that he'd looked after it for 20 years and kept it together. If I was committed to it, he didn't want to see it broken up. He didn't want to sell it to a corporate, which was very honourable of him, and you have to say it's very good, because he'd actually bought it out of receivership, didn't wind it up, didn't disperse it, wanted to see someone who was young and keen and wanted to give it a go. So I obviously went down there and sold myself and told him all those things. Now, he had no reason to believe me, but I've since obviously come through with the goods and done exactly all the things I said I was going to do. And so he was very good to deal with, very straightforward. I paid, he sold. So I had to sell all the commercial sheep I had, which as, again, sheep were rising and I was able to, and again, got Joe to sell all my commercial sheep and he sold them well. Nearly all of the stud sheep that I bought, I had to put in a little bit more money, but not much. I was able to actually buy the stud sheep that came with Collinsville out of the commercial sheep, and then I looked at it as in I was getting the brand and the business and all that for free. Now, I'm not trying to say that Paddy sold it badly. They wanted to go and do other things, but that's the way I was selling it to myself.
So how many stud sheep did you have, like, to start with?
At that stage, I reckon we bought 4,000 or 5,000.
Okay.
Something along those lines, which was lambs, ewes, rams. So then we had sheep on the station and sheep in at Hallett, and so we moved basically the Collinsville brand at Hallett. And again, I'll try to get these numbers right. We weren't the largest selling stud in South Australia. We weren't the largest selling stud in Australia by any means. I think we were selling about sort of 400 rams a year. At that stage, Gum Hill was still selling 1,000 rams a year. If you talk about the amount of rams, Old Ashrows, North Ashrows, Mirundi Park, they were all selling considerably more rams than us.
But Collinsville still had that reputation.
Still had the reputation.
Of that genetic.
And Tim had started. Paddy wouldn't let Tim have an on-property sale. It was only able to sell sheep via auction because, again, they didn't want to go the expense. They had a lot of other competing stuff. And, again, don't want to run down the Hanburys. They were good people, very good to deal with, and that was the decision they made. I went in and just went, right, we are going to give this thing a red-hot go. We have this fantastic brand. I think livestock has a fantastic future. Wool, demand for red meat. Where else do you get the opportunity to have brand number one? In my opinion, I had breeder number one in Australia. I had all the ingredients. We had land on the inside of Gorda's line, being at Kapiti, which we knew could grow really good stud sheep. We had the name, we had the station, we had the story to be able to sell to pastoral properties. So Tim and I then just set about, and I worked with Tim I did everything he did for the first 5 years. Went to all the sheep shows. Still got a lot to learn an enormous amount about stud sheep, classing sheep, what to look for, what we're trying to breed for. And Tim, I've got to say, is the full package, is one of the smartest people I have ever met.
And as you said, if he wasn't part of the package, would you have gone down this track?
I would have been a lot less inclined to go down this track. Not only did you have to have the sheep and the brand, you've got to have the people. we were doing all this and I was making this decision, so we started having our first on-property sale. We had 160 rams for sale. It was an incredibly hard sale. No, 120 rams we started with. Incredibly hard because we had to convince all these people that Tim was selling to sheep privately to come along and bid when we told them, Tim had been telling them for 7 years that we don't want to have a sale because it's not the right way, because that's what the owners were saying.
Had to totally flip
They
it.
had totally flip it. As we made a decision as a business to invest in the genetics, try and actually grow the business, try and continue to sell stud size. And again, we're fortunate. We're in a rising wool environment and a rising red meat environment, so people saw more value in running merinos. And the thing that cuts through was Collinsville had the name, and also when we bred them and presented them properly, I could see very early on, hell, we've actually got the product. We've got a really good product. And when people used our product, it worked, very productive, and we had studs from all over Australia, even at that early stage, knowing the value and the depth of our genetics and Tim's ability, and people coming in, and I thought, this is just a fantastic opportunity. We've got this fantastic product that's being massively undersold. We've almost got the best brand name in Australia. Hell, let's go. So off we went. And it's been a fantastic journey for the last, so we bought Capedi in 10, bought the stud in 14, so it's been the last 10 years. And we've gone from selling 600 rams and then moving on, buying more property at Hallett, buying the property down here, and now we're back to, if you combine the two studs, the largest ram seller in Australia.
How many rams did you sell at the
Last year we
sale?
sold about 2,200. So last year Collinsville did about nearly 1,400 rams and East Bungaree did 800. So the next biggest seller of merino rams in Australia is Bunuk Wanganella. They do about 1,400 to 1,500. And then Ejalabra out of Queensland, a massively successful business. And then 3 years ago, we also bought the East Bungaree business off the Brookses. They didn't want to stay in sheep. They were going through succession planning process. I was able to structure that deal where we paid for it over a 6-year period. So it's actually been a positive cash flow thing since we've owned the business. So we've sold more rams than what we have to pay every year. So that's actually been quite good because they wanted to get out. They didn't have any land for sale, so it was quite hard for them to sell the business, to be honest with you, because if you're going to go and buy East Bungaree, it has to stay in the mid-north. And you have to have the right land and enough land. We were fortunate at that stage we had about 15,000 acres at Hallett, and the land down here and the land out east of Burra, where we were able to absorb their sheep and actually run their business. So we still run them both separately. But the other advantage of that, which is one of the other major things that drew me to buying the East Bungaree business, so it's all about the people, was Tony Brooks. Tony's worked in the industry for an incredibly long time. He's probably been working in the merino industry for the last 45, 50 years, has a wealth of experience, and he now is basically our major salesperson and does sell quite a few Collinsville sheep and all the East Bungaree sheep. Again, it's all about building the team. Tony's largely responsible for a lot of the selling, going and visiting customers, classing customers' sheep. So Tim really has the opportunity to sit there and breed the best sheep and run the operation here, so we're producing the best product. And again, Tony has an attachment to Collinsville. So when Tony first started in the merino business, he actually worked for Willagalici, which were the Nitschkes, which were next door to our property, Capedi property at Hallett, and he actually worked for them and was responsible for managing, and they were a fully Collinsville-based flock, and Nitschkes at that stage, sort of in the late 80s, were running about 10 stations, one of the largest sheep owners in Australia. They used to come and buy Collinsville rams, and when Collinsville sold the world record price ram for $450,000, Richard Nitschke bought it, who was the next door neighbour to where we are at Capedi now. Tony was working for it, and a lot of the pictures I have of that world record ram, Tony's holding it as the purchaser on behalf of Richard, and now Tony is working for us.
Oh, my goodness.
So it's all gone round in circles, and again, it's really good. That I think also attracted Tony to us because he's had a long association with the industry and our business and understands our brand. So again, been very fortunate to take advantage of a lot of that, working together, and sort of Tim and I don't let go of the quality and just keep pushing and doing the best thing we can. So we run 2 embryo transfer programs a year, 1 artificial insemination program a year, and also have a natural spring lambing and a natural autumn lambing. So we've hopefully got a supply of rams all year whilst investing in the best genetics we can and just having an unwavering focus on quality and trying to do it better than anyone else in Australia.
Why did you buy Catalunga here in
Like all these things, several different reasons. One of the main reasons was in the drought of 2018 was the first time the business got really stretched. And we were sitting there buying barley out of the silo system at Port Pirie for $400 a tonne, then having to pay a discharge fee, or it's actually got, I forget, it's got another term for that, and then having to pay the freight from Port Pirie back to us at Hallett just to feed the sheep to keep them alive. We had to feedlot, we had to bring sheep in from the station, we had to build feedlot pens in at Hallett because there was just no rain. It was just absolutely unprecedented. At the same time, we were doing all that and we were just getting absolutely reamed because with a stud, you have to hold your numbers. No one cares about the drought that happened 2 years ago when the ram sales now and the sheep were born 18 months ago and then the mating happened 5 months before that. So it's sort of a 2.5 year cycle. No one cares about what the weather was sort of 2.5 years ago when you're having your ram sale. You can't be a commercial farmer and go and sell breeding stock and then buy back breeding stock because it's all stuck in your breeding and what you're wanting to do, and you're wanting to make sure that your sale and your lineup is as good as it can be so you can sell as many rams and compete with everyone else. So I thought, hell, we can't have this again. This is just this, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. At the same time, I knew of land down here because we'd been living in the mid-north for 7 years, and I'd obviously met people in the district and driven around and seen different people's farms. I knew about land down here at Mintero, and even in that 2018 drought, when we didn't reap a grain up at Hallett, they were still pulling 4 or 5 tonne crops per hectare down here. And I thought, right, we have got a little bit of geographical diversity in that we're out at the station, then we're inside Gorders Line at Hallett, but Hallett's pretty marginal and it's pretty high. It's bloody cold and it's really frosty. Great for sheep. As you go north in South Australia, the trees get smaller and the sheep get bigger, but not so good for having surety of food supply for your sheep when you have to keep yours alive when grain's really expensive. So, right, I need to find some even more reliable cropping country. I looked down the southeast, couldn't find anything there. I need to find some even more reliable cropping country so we can grow our own oats because we feed our sheep milling oats. And we don't feed them barley because the barley raises their temperature and makes them infertile. So we grow a type of milling oat, which is the oat that you actually use like to go in muesli and goes into muesli bars. So it's got a better feed test, but the sheep can't get acidosis, so they can't overeat it and make themselves sick and kill themselves. So we need to find a place to reliably grow this year in, year out, no matter what the season does. And so, again, I had to go up buying this place for that exact reason 2 years before that when the Goss family had it for sale and I missed out to Tim Edmonds from the Northern Territory. Tim came in and he would openly admit this, bought a lot more country around it, put in roads, fences, went absolutely nuts. But I did happen to hear along the grapevine that he did have some other stuff and contracts that he'd entered into. Again, I can't really say too much all about that, and probably maybe in more of a position where he may be looking to sell. So I actually thought, well, I'm not going to ring. So I actually got some people at Elders Real Estate to ring up, and then we very quickly sort of entered into some negotiations. Tim,
why didn't you want to ring him?
I was afraid of him. I thought because he did have quite a reputation, and I'd have to say that's well founded. Tim is a very good negotiator. Very good negotiator. So that was actually really interesting. Learned a lot about doing this deal. We also wanted to live down here. Our kids at that stage were going to St Joe's. Sophie was heavy driving for half an hour to catch the bus at Andrews, and then they were getting on the Spalding bus and driving all the way to Clare. So they were on the bus for an hour, basically, every morning. So they'd leave to catch the bus at 7 o'clock, and then they wouldn't get home till 5, and that didn't even account sport, ballet, swimming, all the rest of it. So we were keener to move closer to Clare because we loved the school and we loved the area. I was keen to get better land. Obviously, as you get into more and more farming, this is a very common theme. People start selling their lesser land and buying better land with more reliable rainfall because it's just easier and it works better. And so these sort of things lined up.
Drought proofing, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And geographical diversity, vertical integration, all stuff that does make sense. Particularly for our business. So the 3 properties go together really well now. And so we're in the fortunate position where, and I had to buy a lot of land from Tim because he only wanted to sell in one line, and then I wasn't prepared to have that much debt, so I actually sold about a third of what we had to buy from Tim. So a lot of cropping land south of here I sold. We kept some cropping land, enough to grow what we needed to do, and a small amount, and basically kept all the grazing country up in the hills where we run our sheep. And then fortunate enough to have this beautiful property where we are today. Just stunning, very lovely, only 3 owners basically in the last 130 years. So very lucky and consider myself very fortunate and very grateful to be able to get in that position. So, yeah, this is why we are where we're here. I have to be incredibly grateful to my wife who has been incredibly supportive. So you don't just do, I've been saying me a lot. It should be we. You do these things together, and there is no way I could have achieved any of this without Sophie's support, guidance and help. And, we're in it together. And it is great to be able to do it together, and hopefully our children see that as well. Because as I said, earlier on, I'm now becoming more and more aware and cognizant that one of my duties is to set an example for the way my children to act and the way they be and morals and all the rest of it, and proving to them that hard work's what it's all about. So just thank you very much to Sophie and the kids for coming along on the journey and being an integral part of it.
When you moved up to the mid-north, farming people or rural people are very traditional, they're very conservative.
Yep.
What response did you get from the local community?
Well, I'm still an outsider because I've only been here for 14 years. I'm married to a local mid-north girl. So, yes, I'm still an outsider, and I will always be considered an outsider. I've got myself conditioned to that no matter how long I live here. That doesn't really bother me that much. Yes, people are conservative, but again, just like anything in the world, 95% of people you meet are very nice.
Some can call a spade, though. And did you have questions of, gee, you don't know much about what?
100%. 100%. I had all that. I still get that. That doesn't bother me. 100% you get that. And, what would you know? And what are you doing? And you've only got businesses in Adelaide. And sure, my business in Adelaide helps fund doing what we're doing here, particularly handy now, having a business that's running well with off-farm income compared to where we are with interest rates at the minute and sheep prices at the minute. And I think that's also something that's really essential, diversity, continuing to own commercial property in town, continuing to own a business in town as well as chasing your dream here. It's the only way that you can be guaranteed that you're going to be around for the next business cycle. Yes, I will always be labelled an outsider, but that's fine. That doesn't bother me.
What's been the biggest challenge for you out of everything that you've done? What was the hardest part of it all?
Balancing wanting to expand stuff and buy property, because property is the ultimate store of value, and that's how you really get to where you want to be. Dealing with banks, dealing with interest, and having a business good enough to run over the top of the land you're trying to buy to make interest payments and continue to pay some of it off. And that will be, I know that sounds very simplistic, but that is the business challenge that, I'm in. I'm fortunate that we've had some good deal of success in the Collinsville business, so we've been able to build up quite a buffer in what we're doing, but obviously we need that buffer at the minute because last year we were selling coal hoggets for $400 plus. This year our highest car hogget price has been $120, so it's like absolutely plummeted through.
So is this the worst period for you since taking on?
It's the worst sheep price.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Up until 6 months ago, the businesses have been in the best position. So it's great. We're in a position where we can actually handle it and do it. And so I've made money in farming for the 14 years since I've been doing it. This will be the first year where we won't turn a profit. I'm almost guaranteed on that. But that's just business cycles.
Yeah.
I respect a lot of people in farming. I've been very lucky to make it for 14 years. And the only reason we have is because we've got a branded product. And then I look at our Collinsville business. We still had a full clearance at our on property sale. We were still able to have a very healthy number and have still sold nearly 1,000 rams in Collinsville this year already, which is, given where we are in the market, absolutely fantastic. EB hasn't been as good because the brand's not as strong, but wool's off a little bit. But what will hurt us, so we're not going to have like a massive loss, but commercial sheep is still a big part of our business. There'll be a $2 million difference or a $1.5 million difference between what we got for commercial sheep last year to what we'll get for commercial sheep this year. So the sheep market hasn't done this. Again, you have to go back to probably when the reserve price scheme crashed, which is a similar time, 92, to what we're talking about before. So the market hasn't done this for 35 years. Again, you go back to speaking to experienced people who've watched these markets and interacted with them and done it all. People have been in the industry for 60 years. And even when it happened then, people are saying to me who are 65 going, they have never seen it happen so fast, so quick. It'd be really interesting to see where we are in 2 years' time. You read the modelling, they're saying there is still a massive demand for red meat, and there's still some long-term strategists out there saying they think the price of lamb will be back to $10 by 2026, and we're only in 2024. We're being told it's a bottleneck with sheep processors, massive talk of El Nino, massive flock build-up. People in New South Wales now going, it's very dry, and southern Queensland, it's very dry. The last drought, we were happy to feed them because the ewes were worth $300. Now the ewes are worth $50. We're not going to feed them. Barley's now the price of what it was at the end of the last drought, not the start. So it's $350. There's just no money in it, so they are just quitting them hard. So there's just this. And you've got the federal government wanting to ban live sheep exports, which is a great idea in Canberra, but not so good for the Western Australian sheep market. So they're doing something which is another external factor outside of my control, outside of anyone else's control. Which is just one of these compounding factors, and then everybody's trying to do it at once. The processors saying I can't get the staff, so they don't have the throughput. Every processor in Australia is currently expanding their capacity at the minute with investment, which means they're actually having to slightly shut down lines to actually make them bigger. So again, the story on that is in 2 years' time, things will be better in terms of more processing capacity. So you've had all this happen at once, and coupled with the fact that we are having record sheep exports at the minute in terms of boxed and everything else. It actually, without trying to be super optimistic, when it all gets back in equilibrium and the eastern states aren't selling flat out and the Western Australians aren't getting out of sheep flat out because they're being told that their industry is going to be absolutely creamed by the federal government, it actually looks very positive. But I am just going to have to ride out the next 18 months. But that's business. Well,
with that in mind, what is next for George Millington?
Well, whilst it's been a tremendous journey to get here, this is a generational business. It's been going for a long time. I'm able to sort of use the cash flow that comes to the town to continue to make it more stable and continue to sort of let it grow and let it do what it is. I don't see us wanting to change the current model with the 3 properties and the way we're operating at the minute too much. Now it's basically to try and enjoy it and do a little bit more for the industry and try and get a little bit more involved and try and make sure we've got an industry for future generations.
Also, George has been elected as a director on the board of Australian Wool Innovation, which is an organisation that collects wool grower levies, markets the Woolmark label and receives co-funding from the federal government. It's pivotal in marketing wool and research and development. He was elected after this interview was recorded. George has a view that even though AWY has been marketing wool for many, many years worldwide, he thinks that more still needs to be done.
I think, and again, I'm a positive person and good for our brand and believe in the product that we're growing, wool has a fantastic story to tell. It's natural, renewable, organic, all the things that consumers want these days. Competes with nylon, which is a byproduct of the crude oil industry. Competes with cotton, which uses a tremendous amount of water and a tremendous amount of chemical, which is another natural fibre like wool. Wool can be grown on some pretty tough countries. It is in northern South Australia where a lot of our customers are, where no other land use is possible, and it produces this fantastic fibre. We need to be going to our overseas markets and explaining that to them.
But isn't that happening now?
It is happening a bit, but I think it needs to be happening more, and we need to get on it harder, and we need to really get it on the front foot and actually find out why isn't the story getting through. Because also I alluded to 80 million sheep in Australia at the minute, approximately. I don't think there's ever going to be a massive amount more competing land uses and all the rest of it. And at the moment, wool is losing on the sort of land use thing because it's not providing a viable enough return to a mixed farmer who could be growing wheat instead, with wheat at $400 a tonne. They're thinking, what do I want to run 1,500 Merinos for? I'll just put in another 2 paddocks of wheat and sit on a header. So we need to provide people a reason. Now, just prior to COVID, if you're growing 20 micron wool, which is what we do, you were getting $3,200 a bale. It's all great, stacked up really well. At the moment, we're getting $1,800 to $2,000. It needs to go back to there or more. If you go back to simple economics, back to first-year economics that I did at university, if supply is fixed and demand rises, the price can only go one way, and supply is fixed. I can't see more Merinos. I can't see us drastically growing more wool in Australia simply because of competing land use and everything else. So if we can grow the demand even by a small amount, the price, because we've got a very inelastic supply, the price will be demand will be very elastic. So we should see quite a healthy rise with only a modest growth in volume of demand for wool. I'm not professing to have all the answers. I do have a modicum of business success outside of the wool industry, which I've sort of written to, and it's gone over quite well with other AWR shareholders, where I've sort of said, I just want to receive maximum value for my money and your money, being other levy payers' money, make sure we can get the best bang for buck for levy growers, and that's a decision I've always constantly made running my businesses, what to spend on capital expenditure, what to spend on marketing, and try and receive the best bang for buck so we can try and make the industry sustainable for future generations. And at my age, 48, I've had a little bit of experience outside of the industry. I've had a little bit of experience inside the industry. I've got the business model I want. I'm very lucky with 2 fantastic general managers in my 2 different businesses. I have the opportunity to be able to go and do this.
So pretty much at a board level, though, you would be pushing for more money to be spent on marketing, not so much on R&D.
100%. And then trying to get more money from the government because the wool industry is huge. The government gives a lot more money to the red meat industry. And again, it's a bit outside of AWI's remit, but merinos are a fantastic eating animal. MLA's done a lot of stuff on intramuscular fat and all the rest of it, the way they're better eating than prime lamb and crossbreds, using the merino name to actually grow an even greater demand for merino sheep in the fact, out of the red meat industry as well. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Well, George, awesome story.
Oh, well.
You're only 48.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story today. I am so excited to see what you guys do, the Millington family and the Collinsville name, what you achieve over the next 10 to 20 years.
My pleasure, Annabelle. Thank you for having me.
Wow, now that's a story. What did you think? Thanks, George, for your time and revealing so much about yourself and your business journey. It's quite remarkable. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. I'm so proud and honoured to have this opportunity to share these stories with you. For new listeners of the Voice It podcast, a little bit about me and Voice It. My name is Annabelle Homer and I am a former ABC rural broadcaster, but I now run a small communications business in the mid-north of South Australia in the Clare Valley. I'm a voice coach and a podcaster and an MC. I host and produce podcasts for organisations, I MC events, and I run public speaking workshops and record family memoirs. Please get in touch if any of those services appeal to you. Catch you next time for another episode of the Voice It podcast.